Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday night study. And over the past several weeks, we've been going through the book of Revelation, but we are now finished with the book of Revelation, and now we're moving into something completely different. So, in a way, we kind of started with this like end of times, area in Scripture, and now we're kind of going to the beginning, if you will, over the subject matter that we're going to talk about over the next few weeks. And what we're going to talk about essentially are the high Sabbaths. These are very special days that God has set aside and are days of observation. As a matter of fact, someone asked me Sunday, is this about festivals and that sort of thing? And I said no, but actually it kind of is. And so who I said that to, I apologize. I just misspoke, but obviously there are some relations there, connections, if you will, between the high Sabbaths and the different festivals that are involved. So we'll be talking about that over the next several weeks, month or two maybe, as we go through these, at least 7 weeks. And um, and so I hope that you enjoy it. Again, if there's anything that you want to study, please let me know, and I will add it to the list of things. Okay. Wednesday nights is all about learning and growing, and I want to make sure that we're doing that and teaching something that you want to learn about, not just something that I want to learn about. So let's start with the high Sabbaths. And the first thing that we need to understand is, what is a high Sabbath? Well, a high Sabbath is a special Sabbath day used by God to remind the people of Israel of their past and his present. So the way to look at that is that God uses these days to remind Israel about certain activities, certain things that have taken place. So if we think about, from a Christian point of view, if we think about Christmas, right? We use Christmas as a time to remind us of the birth of Christ. We use Easter as a moment in time to remember Christ on the cross and his death and resurrection. Those are things that we use in order to remind us of certain things. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we will look at in the High Sabbath is the Passover. The Passover was taking place at the moment that Christ was having the Last Supper with all of his apostles and disciples in the upper room. That was a part of Passover. So they were observing one of the high Sabbaths when Christ instituted the Lord's Supper, when he talked about being betrayed, when Peter spoke up and said, I will never do this. I mean, they were participating in one of the high Sabbaths, which was the Passover meal. And so we'll discuss that more as time goes on. But again, the Passover meal was something that they do to remind them of what happened in Egypt and being, um, you know, let go by the Egyptians and taken out, and the beginning of their journey to the Promised Land. So all the high Sabbaths are meant to do something very specific. So what are the high Sabbaths? Well, the high Sabbaths, also known, by the way, as the Holy Convocation, which simply means a gathering of people. Those days are the Sabbath days, which we'll talk about tonight. The Pentecost, Passover, Feast of Weeks, Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Trumpets. We'll also look at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which within itself has two Sabbaths, the first day and the seventh day. And then we'll look at the Day of Atonement. These are all considered to be um, high Sabbath, or high holy days is another word or phrase that is used to describe these particular days. Not all of these holy convocations occur on the Sabbath day. Some occur on different days of the week. And so as we go along, we'll discuss that, and we'll discuss how they determine when those days are celebrated every year as well. And they always, for the most part, change, just like we see other holidays change throughout the year, the dates that is. I mean, really, if you think about it, there's very few dates that or holidays that have dates that change. Christmas doesn't change. Um, The 4th of July doesn't change, right? But Easter, um, Labor Day, Memorial Day, some of these always have dates that change. Thanksgiving, that date always changes. But Christmas doesn't, right? It's always on the 25th, and the 4th of July obviously doesn't change, but some do. So we'll talk about that as we go through all the different Sabbaths, and we'll talk about those dates and that sort of thing. So before we can even understand the high Sabbaths, we really need to talk about the Sabbath, and how that was established and how we um, come to know it as a day of rest. And the first really instance that we see of the Sabbath we find in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. And in those verses, what we see is this: Thus the heavens and earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. Again, that's Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. So in Genesis, we see this first glimpse of the Sabbath day where God created for the first 6 days. It's essentially God worked for 6 days, and then on the seventh day, God rested. Now, let's first talk about, before we get into that part about God resting, let's talk about the 7 days. How do we know the Sabbath is a Saturday? Now, in our calendar, the seventh day is Saturday. Our week begins on Sunday. So we begin with, that's the first day, and we count, and Saturday is the seventh day. The same holds true for the uh, Jewish calendar, right? The first day is Sunday, the last day is Saturday. But how do we get the origins of the week? Did it come from the Hebrews? Did it come from somewhere else? There are different theories on where the 7 days come from. First, there is the astrology theory, which comes from the ancient Babylonian astrology. They used the sun, the moon, and the five heavenly bodies, planets, or gods. Some of them really looked at them as gods to come up with the 7 days a week. And the names of the week reflect these planets or these heavenly bodies or these gods. So Sunday is associated with the sun, Monday the moon, and then from there, Tuesday Mars, Wednesday Mercury, Thursday Jupiter, Friday is Venus, and then Saturday is Saturn, obviously, right? So this theory was eventually abandoned, though, because no one could find any evidence to conclude that this is where we get the days of the week from. And so eventually, in the mid to late 19th century, people said, well, this is just hooey, because this is not, we can't find anything to back any of this up. It was just a theory that didn't work. Another theory that popped up in the late 19th century is the Pan-Babylonian theory. So in this theory, it's based upon the Babylonian cuneiform tablets. So cuneiform is a logo-syllabic script used to write several different languages. So if we go back and we look at ancient languages, we see this very distinct kind of script. And that script has different angles, triangles, pyramids, edges, all different types of things to help make this manuscript, right, or language, or the ability for people to communicate through a written language. And so we see this a lot in ancient writings, but in the Babylonian ancient writing, which was typically on these clay tablets, we see this writing, and then in this particular writing, there is a particular word that comes up many, many times. And that word is Shabbatum. And that is Shabbatum. And within that word, essentially, it gives us this sense of the Hebrew form of Sabbath, and that is a day of rest. So when we study that, what we find is that on the 15th day of the month, or the time of the full moon in the Babylonian calendar, we see that word being used. And then we also see it being used to describe the 7th, 14th, 21st, and 28th day of the month. So if you're following along, every 7 days they're having this Shabbat. And on those particular days, and this is why people feel like there's this kind of connection, right, with the Hebrews, is the king could not talk state of affairs. The king could not eat meat cooked on coals. The king could not change clothes. The king could not ride in a chariot. I mean, for the king, it was really a laid back day, not going to do anything really, and just kind of take it easy. What we also find is that priests were not allowed to consult with oracles. Doctors were not allowed to treat patients, and special sacrifices were given on all of these different days. So we see this kind of connection between Shabbatim and the Sabbath. And so it's just really kind of interesting how those two kind of connect, right? Well, the thing is, though, is that there are a lot of differences. While we see some things that are kind of similar, we see so many more differences than we do similarities. So in the differences, what we see is that in the Babylonian days, their days of the month are reckoned differently, counted differently than they are in the Hebrew calendar. The Babylonian restrictions only apply to a certain class of people, while in the Hebrew they apply to every single person. And then another difference that we see is that no business is encouraged to take place in the Babylonian Shabbatim, but a lot of business does take place. In the Hebrew Sabbath, no business takes place whatsoever because no one is allowed to work. So while we see some similarities, there are still a lot of differences. And so the idea that the pan Babylonian theory had any influence on days of the week is again abandoned, and people thought, well, this doesn't work either. We see similarities, but maybe the Babylonians were really influenced by the Hebrews, and I think that's what we have to really come to terms with, is that the 7 days really come from God himself, that we see in Genesis chapter 1, because we see that God created in 6 days. Now, here is where we as Christians have to, in some way, shape, or form, think about days. And what we see is that it's not until day 4 that we see the sun and moon come into play. In the first 3 days, God creates, and then God rests. God creates, and then God rests. Now, when I say rest, I mean he creates during the day, doesn't at night. Creates during the day, it doesn't at night, right? Very similar to us. We work throughout the day, most of us, and then we sleep at night, and that is our moment of rest. But again, I go back. Sun and moon don't come in until day 4. So that means the sun and moon aren't around on those first few days of creation. So what is a day and what is a night? And we have to reconcile this. There's so many Christians, lay leaders, pastors, teachers, who are just going to hammer home, oh, it's 24 hours. It's 24 hours. And the thing is that we don't know if it was 24 hours, right? Because time for us is different than God. So while we want to stick to this 6 days, 6 days, 6 days, and while it's true, it did take 6 days, but it took God 6 days, not man 6 days. And they're two different time periods. So let's not get caught up in arguments about how many days it took God to create everything. But what we see, though, is God giving us days, right? Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. Day 1 might have been hundreds of years that we would know, but to God, it's within that 24-hour period in his view, right? In his perception, in his I don't know how to word that, to be honest with you, in his realm, right? That's time is different for him. So don't get caught up in the whole 6 days has to be 6 days or 6 days, and um, you know we argue that point with someone who believes in Big Bang and there's no creator and that sort of thing, right? Don't get in arguments about that. It just doesn't matter. What matters is that we just see that God created in 6 different days. The thing that comes next for us as we study the Sabbath is what happens on the seventh day, and that is God rested. So if we go back to those verses in Genesis, so God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. The question becomes when we see that then is God rested on the seventh day. Did God really need rest? I mean, God's deity, God is God. He says it happens. Do you really need that rest? I think the answer is no. God really didn't need the rest. But God, being our greatest example, knowing that what was coming was creation of human beings made in his image, he knew that they would need rest. A human being is not deity. A human being lives in this body that breaks down, and this body needs rest, right? So we're going to talk more about that in a second, about the understanding of um, that rest. But just know that God rested and he blessed that day so that we would see that and know that we need to rest too. He did this on purpose. Now, while we talk about rest, the main thing that we need to see here is that God made that day for two different purposes, not only rest, but also to worship him. We are meant to worship God. God wants your full attention when we worship him. So when God rests, and then as he creates the Sabbath, which says you don't work on the Sabbath, God wants your full attention. So for us as believers, which we'll talk about at some other point, our Sabbath really is Sunday. And we choose the Sunday because that's the day that Jesus rose again. Traditionally, that's when the church met. And when I say traditionally the church, I'm talking about Paul and many others. That was traditionally when they met, was on that particular Sunday. So we as believers, we meet on Sunday. And when we do that, as we take that moment of rest to gather together as a people group of fellow believers, we are meant to worship God. God wants our full attention. If we have to work that day, all we're thinking about is work. If you think about that, what they had to go through, what they had to accomplish and do in life, they had to do things like plow the field and bring in the water and do all these different things that we don't have to do today. But that would be on their minds if they had to work on the Sabbath. God doesn't want us to think about other things when we are supposed to be worshiping him. Now let's go back to the day of rest. I found this thing by Integris, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a large hospital network based in Oklahoma, and they gave some reasons why the body needs rest. And one of the reasons, or the reasons they gave, let me put it that way, are this: rest is vital for better mental health, increased concentration and memory. I cannot tell you, right? When I don't get enough rest, when I don't get enough sleep, I can't focus, I can't concentrate. And if we think about what Paul says and about how the enemy is always roaming around us, and we need to be sober minded, don't we also have to be alert? And to be alert, don't you feel like we probably need to have some type of, we need that sleep, we need that rest in order to do that? So rest is vitally important to us as believers, just as it was to those who were under the Mosaic law. We need that rest. It is vital to our mental health, our ability to think and to focus. It's also vital to our immune system. It reduces our stress levels and improves our mood and even a better metabolism. So when we think about rest, it's not just about relaxing or not doing any work. It's about allowing our body to essentially just shut down. Now, everyone has a different way of relaxing. Okay. Um, I will tell you that, and I know this is weird, but for me, relaxing means yard work. Like I love going out and mowing the lawn, doing a little weed eating, pulling some weeds. Like to me, that's relaxing. But to other people, they look at it and go, "Well, why are you working?" And there's oftentimes I do it after church on a Sunday, just because I just find it to be a nice day. It's quiet. I can go out there, my lawnmower, put my headphones on, and just drive around and cut grass and listen to music while I'm doing it, and or sometimes nothing, and I just like the silence. I mean, it just really depends, right? So everyone's idea of relaxing is different, but we do have to have those moments when we allow our bodies to just recharge, right? Recharge the batteries. Oftentimes we pick Sunday to do that. Sometimes people pick a Saturday, and you know what? If you're lucky enough, you can do both a Saturday and a Sunday, right? So it's up to you, but that rest is really needed. But did God need a rest? Again, I've already kind of talked about this. No, he really didn't, but he's setting the example for us. We all need rest, and you can't keep. I once read a thing that said a clenched fist, excuse me, a clenched fist at some point has to release itself, right? We can't go around like this all the time, ready to fight someone. At some point in time, we gotta relax. You know, our muscles have to relax in our shoulders and throughout our body. I mean, we just have to relax at some point in time. So rest is very important. FYI, we also see the days mentioned in Noah and the flood and the story of Jacob and Rachel, the need of rest, right? Rest is needed. Even when God has you on a mission and needs you to do something important and vital, there has to be rest. I'm seeing so many pastors right now just give up because they're just worn out. They are just done. And unfortunately, we have so many church members doing the same thing. Because here's what happens: we find a church member that's willing to do something, and as soon as they say yes, and we're like, well, you know, so and so said yes about this, maybe they'll do this for us as well. And we just start using all these church members. Really, I should say all, a small amount of church members do all of this work, and then they get stressed out and burnt out, and then we lose them as well. So again, rest is vital, rest is needed, and we have to be very careful. All right, so the first time that we really see the Sabbath being talked about again is in Genesis chapter 1, but the first time that we see the word being used is in Exodus 16:23. In Exodus 16:23, it says this: He said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to keep till the morning." So this is Moses talking to the nation of Israel. It says, hey, on the Friday before, I want you to prepare for 2 days of meals, because the following day we're going to call the Holy Sabbath. It is something the Lord has declared to be the Holy Sabbath, and we're going to recognize it. So you're not going to cook on that day. You're not going to do all these other things that you normally do every single day of the week. We are going to declare this day a day of rest. And actually, Moses explains in a little greater detail later on in chapter 16 in verses 25 and 26. He says, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none." So he says, do these things, and then on the Sabbath, Moses declares this is a day of rest. On 6 days you collect the manna. On the seventh day you shall rest. So God made Israel aware of the Sabbath before he issues the law. But by the time that the commandment comes around, they've already been observing it, so they're already used to it, already doing what God is about to command them. So in Exodus 20, verse 8, we actually see that commandment come to life. "Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. We as believers need to understand the importance of the Sabbath day. That there is a moment in time that we have to rest and relax. And whether that's a Saturday or a Sunday, doesn't matter. But what I will tell you is that traditionally speaking, we as believers have made Sunday our Sabbath. Traditionally speaking, Sunday is a day of rest. It is the day that we leave the work behind, that we gather together as people, fellow believers, to worship God, to dive into His Word, to draw closer to Him, to draw closer to each other. It is of vital importance. I've often heard people talk about how I don't need to go to church, fine at home, blah, blah, blah. Yes, you do. You need the church. Just as much as the church, the local church needs you, you need them. It is a part of our recharging of the batteries that we can pray together, worship together, be together. So vitally important for us to do that. And so I encourage you, if you're watching, go somewhere. If you're not, please find some place to go. It is so, so important for you to get to know other believers and worship together on that day of rest. Okay. Unfortunately, there are believers that have to work on Sundays, and I have been there, and it stinks. But you got to find that day. You got to find that day of rest. You got to find the day that you can go to the golf course, go outside, mow the lawn, just go sit on the porch, go look at a tree, go do something, right? Your mental health and physical health are so important. It's important that you do that to help your mental and physical health. So I hope that you do that. Next week, because I don't want to go into it now, because honestly, it's another lesson, right? That would take another 30 to 45 minutes. So next week we're going to talk about what happens on the Sabbath for those who are Jewish, right? In Judaism, we're going to talk about how they observe it, right? And then we'll kind of relate that to the Christian as well, and how we observe our Sundays, our Sabbath day. And then as we go on and we look at the high Sabbaths, we'll talk about each of them. We'll talk about when to expect them on the calendar, what all takes place, and how people worship and partake in all the different things that they do on these high Sabbaths. And so we'll get more into that as the weeks progress. Thanks for joining me on our night one of the high Sabbath. Tonight was an introduction. Next week, we're going to get a little more deeper into it. If you have questions, email me, pastorg72@gmail.com. You can text me if you want. You can send me a private message on Facebook, or I'll see you at church on Sunday, 940 South Kings Highway, 9:30 Sunday School, 10:30 worship service. Okay. Thanks for joining me. Have a blessed week, and I will see you Sunday. And if not, I'll see you next Wednesday. All right. God bless.